Okay, so this is the second part of retrieval failure. You'll be able to apply, we'll look at that in lessons a bit more, but evaluate the theory. Okay, so you need to think about having 2 or 3 good paragraphs evaluating whether this is a good theory or not, whether we believe it's good, whether there's evidence for it or not. You'll be able to evaluate context-dependent forgetting and state-dependent, so within retrieval failure, those 2 AO1 aspects. All AO3. Okay, so we've looked at Gooden and Baddeley's research in the deep sea divers. Eysenck even argues that retrieval failure is perhaps the main reason for forgetting. So we've got Eysenck, to put this in context, he's a very famous psychologist. You may have heard of him before. If you go on to do psychology, you'll hear him a lot more. So he's agreeing with it. Yeah, he says that all of the supporting evidence increases its validity. So you've got real life studies, a little bit like this deep sea diver, and it's not super real, but it's not completely in a lab. And you've got deep lab studies that are showing over and over and over again that the retrieval failure does exist, and it is one of the things that stops remembering or increases forgetting in the long-term memory. So lots of supporting evidence. Questioning context effects. Baddeley, 1966, that different contexts have to be very different to see an effect. So what we're saying here is the clock, room 16 next to room 17, is the contexts are too close. As much as they are different, they're different rooms, they're too close together, and that will mean that there won't be a difference. Baddeley is saying the contexts have to be really, really different. So a classroom and, underwater, or on a roller coaster, or something that's very, very different. Learning something in one room, recalling another, does not necessarily mean it will be forgotten. As the environments are often not different enough, real life applications of retrieval effects do not actually explain much forgetting. So this last point here, I just want to get down that it doesn't explain a massive amount. Godden and Baddeley, 1980, replicated their earlier underwater study using a recognition test of recall. There was no context-dependent effect. This was the same in all 4 conditions. Limits retrieval failure as an explanation of forgetting due to the presence or absence of cues. Only affects memory when testing recall. So basically saying that when they replicated it, it didn't happen again. Right, so that it hasn't got validity as an experiment, that we can't replicate it. Right, so cannot be replicated, I think is the kind of the key paragraph here. Problems with ESP. So when a cue produces successful recall of a word, we assume that the cue must have been present at the time of learning. If the cue does not result in a successful recall, we assume that the cue was not at the time of encoding. Basically what this is saying is that's a really weak way of running an experiment, that just to say that if they don't remember it, then it clearly wasn't there at the time of encoding. If they do remember it, then clearly that cue was there at the time of encoding. So it's not the most kind of scientific experiment that you can ever have. Everyday applications. People often report forgetting. You can walk downstairs, and when you get to the bottom, you forget what you came for. Walk back up, you remember. So this is a positive, is that it has face validity. We may have talked about that before. That it makes sense to us. We, as humans, are walking around, and we regularly forget things. And then we walk into the same context. We walk into a room and go, oh, I remembered what that was. Or we, have a cup of coffee and we're in the same state that we were before, and we remember that. So it has a lot of face validity, and that becomes one of the basic principles of cognitive interview when we look at context reinstatement. All right. Eyewitness testimony next. Bye.